Welcome to the Block of the Month 2022 Month 2 block. This month's block is actually 4 6.5-inch blocks that will measure 6.5 by 24.5 when we're done. Here is the pattern for this month's block. You can either push pause and write down the information that you need, or you can take screenshots and print it at home, or you can join our group on Facebook called the Quilted Forest Friends, and on that page we have a file that you can print at home. I'll also have the pattern at the end of the video so you can get it then too. Let's get started with the cutting. From the background, you need 1/8 yard, and you will cut one strip 1.5 inches by the width of fabric. And then you will cut that strip in half so that you have 2 strips that are 1.5 inches wide. From the medium fabric, you need 1/8 yard. You will cut one strip that is 2.5 inches wide and one strip that is 1.5 inches wide. The 1.5 inch wide strip you will cut in half on the fold to have 2 pieces. From the 2.5 inch strip, you will cut 2 squares that are 2.5 by 2.5 and 8 rectangles that are 2.5 by 1.5. And then you will cut the remainder of the strip down to 1.5 inches wide. When I'm cutting these pieces, I will start with my ruler at the 6-inch mark and then cut at the 4.5 inch mark, the 3-inch mark, and the 1.5 inch mark. That way I have to move my fabric less and my cutting is a little bit more accurate. From the dark fabric, you also need 1/8 yard, and you will cut one strip that is 2.5 inches wide and one strip that is 1.5 inches wide from the width of the fabric. You will cut the 1.5 inch strip on the fold so that you have 2 pieces that are 1.5 inches wide. From the 2.5 inch strip, you will cut 2 squares that are 2.5 by 2.5 and 8 rectangles that are 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Then you will cut the remainder of the strip 1.5 inches wide. In making smaller cuts like this, I like to use a smaller ruler that's easier to handle. I'm going to take the time right now to cut the fabrics for my other 2 colorways that I'm making. I'm making a red, white, and blue version, and I'm making a version with a black background and bright colored prints. Now it's time to head to the sewing machine. Make sure you're using 1/4 inch seam allowances when you sew. Piece one of the background 1.5 inch strips onto a 1.5 inch dark strip, and then piece the other 1.5 inch background strip to a medium 1.5 inch strip. I have sped up the videos for some of this stitching, so it may look like my stitches are either really big or really small, but they're actually just a regular stitch length. Piece the medium 1.5 inch leftover strip to the dark 1.5 inch leftover strip, but do not press yet when you're done sewing. You need to do cutting before you press for this particular piece. Okay, so I have my strip set and it is pieced but not pressed. You are going to subcut this into 16 sections that are 1.5 inches wide. I'm going to make the cutting go a little bit faster, and I'm going to start with my ruler at the 6-inch mark, and then I'm going to cut at the 4.5 inch mark, and then I'm going to cut at the 3-inch mark and the 1.5 inch mark, and I'm going to keep doing that until the whole strip set is cut through. I do have to straighten the starting point about every other time I cut, just to make sure my pieces don't start going wonky. Okay, now it's time to press. For the strip units, you are going to press those towards the medium or the dark fabric. When pressing, I like to press it flat before I open it up to press it towards the dark. I think it lays flatter when I'm finished and I get a much nicer seam. Sometimes if my strip sets are being a little ornery, I will use Mary Ellen's Best Press Spray. For the cut sections, you are going to press 8 of the units towards the dark and 8 of the units toward the medium. Now it's time to cut the pressed units from steps 1 and 2. You will subcut these units into 8 2.5 inch wide sections. After I straighten out my end, I like to first cut it 5 inches and then cut it 2.5 inches, and I make sure I'm always doing a double layer so that I can cut a little bit faster. The cutting is done, and now it's time to sew. Make sure you use 1/4 inch seam allowances. You're going to combine the units from step 3 with the rectangles to make 4 each of the following units. You're going to use the pieces pressed towards the medium with the dark rectangles. You're going to use the pieces pressed towards the dark with the medium rectangles. Work on one pile at a time and make sure you sew all of them exactly the same. I usually double check these to make sure I'm sewing them correctly. Make sure you're sewing them to the correct side to get the units to look right. I did have to get my seam ripper out once for this part. Once you're done piecing, get your blade saver thread cutter out, cut all your pieces apart. I have also been working hard at my other 2 colorways, the red, white, and blue, and the black background with the bright prints. Because these are a little bit smaller blocks, I've gotten out my little pressing mat that I use next to my sewing machine and my portable iron. That way the pieces are little so the iron kind of match the size. For this part, you are going to want to press away from the rectangles. I know it seems like you should press towards the rectangle, but if you press away from the rectangle, later on when you're piecing your blocks, the pieces will fit together much better and the seams will nest. Once you have all the pieces pressed, you're going to want to pile them up and arrange them so that they are ready to sew into the blocks. You are making 2 each of these blocks. I like to work on 1 row at a time and 1 block at a time so that I don't get them confused and rearranged. Make sure you're using 1/4 inch seam allowances when you sew the blocks together. If the pieces were pressed correctly in the last few steps, these pieces should nest together and be easy to sew. You can use pins if you want, but I just kind of keep threading them right through the machine. I like to lay them out as I go so that I make sure I've sewn them together correctly because it's easier to fix now than when they're all together in the quilt. Once your rows are complete, do one last double check to make sure everything's put together correctly, and then it's over to the ironing board to press them. Press your seams as indicated on the pattern. The outer rows will be pressed toward the outside square. The middle row will be pressed towards the inner square. When pressed as shown, when you sew your rows together, the seams will nest together on all the seams. When making smaller blocks like this, or just making 1 block at a time, it's nice to have a little pressing mat and a small iron right next to your sewing machine so you don't have to get up and go to the big ironing board every time. So that's what I've done here. I just have my pressing mat by my sewing machine and I'm sewing and pressing kind of right after each other. I'm also still working on my alternate colorways, which include the black background with the bright colors and the red, white, and blue version. Now it's time to piece the rows together to get the blocks. Make sure you have the pieces lined up right and the correct rows with each other. Now that my blocks are done, I have all 4 of them done, it's time to press. You are going to press these toward the center row. When I'm doing a final pressing on blocks, I often like to start on the back side and then flip it over and press it from the front. I also have my red, white, and blue blocks done and my blocks with a black background and the colorful prints. At this point, the block should measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. You should trim as necessary to get those measurements. Now it's time to sew the blocks together. Rotate one set of your blocks, and then when you put your blocks together, your seams will nest and be easy to sew. Our block is done. Now it's time to press one last time. You're going to want to press towards the darker blocks. I like to press this section from the back side first and then flip it around and press it from the top. So I have all 3 of my colorways finished and I am very happy with the way these blocks turned out. When writing the pattern, I had to test it several times to get the pattern right. So these blocks made up in this great St. Patrick's Day fabric are the result of me testing the pattern. So I thought I would include my sample to show you what you could also do with the blocks. I just made this adorable little table runner, and it was just making the block 2 times and adding an inner and outer border. I'll include the fabric requirements here in case you want to make something similar. It was really fun to make. We hope you will like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.